Viltrumites are a superpowered warrior race of individuals that enslave or conquer entire planets with little to no regard of the natural order of things, as they've convinced themselves that no matter what a planet's got going on, they can just do it better. During this process, they don't usually find any substantial resistance, as more times than not, they just find themselves to be much stronger than any resistance that the planet has lined up against them. But what if they had their eyes on the Earth of the Monsterverse and find themselves trying to conquer a world with titans, from the 8th wonder of the world and seemingly the new king of the Hollow Earth, King Kong, as well as Titanus Godzilla, the one and only king of the monsters and a god amongst titans, as well as the arsenal and allies that these guys have. Today, here on the channel, I seek to answer the question, could the Viltrumites conquer the planet Earth of the Monsterverse? You guys seem to love Invincible as well as Godzilla content, so why not mix it up? Both IPs are relevant at the moment, and hey, Viltrumites find themselves fighting kaiju all the time, so it's not like it's super random. But before diving right in, I want to take the time to talk about the recent support. More specifically, acknowledge the state of the promised GXK video. Don't worry guys, it's not cancelled. But I just want to say that it's going to take a couple of weeks because the film just came out, so there's barely any clips for me to use for the video. And two, more importantly, the novelization and the art book have yet to come out, and these things can tend to have really game-changing information in them. For some context, the art books of Godzilla vs. Kong are what confirmed Godzilla was tired and weakened during the Mechagodzilla final battle. Most of us, when the first film dropped, just assumed that Mechagodzilla was a Ghidorah level threat at least, being able to beat up Godzilla in this manner. But due to the guides that came out shortly after, we know better now. So to avoid going off my headcanons and inferences, I've decided to wait a little bit to give you more concrete sources to pull from. I know a lot of you guys would hope this video to come out sooner, but I hope you guys understand, because I promise, it will lead to a more accurate and overall better video. But that doesn't mean you won't see any GXK information here, so maybe consider this video an appetizer. Let's get this video to 1,000 likes because you guys been smashing the like goals lately, and now I'm going to cover more Godzilla as well as Invincible. So with all that being said, let's get right into the video. Before I get into the Viltrumite scaling, I want to say that I'm going to be using the population count that we have during the events of the Invincible series, so you're not going to see quadrillions of Viltrumites fighting Godzilla and Kong as well as any other titans. So that's around 30 something. Let's say that the current Viltrumites invade the planet Earth because of humanity's potential. Because as explained in the comic book, Viltrumites and humanity share almost 100% compatibility, and they aim to turn the planet Earth into somewhat of a repopulation center. But seeing as how this is the Earth of the Monsterverse, they decided that their children can't be living in a world with giant monsters everywhere. And plus, I doubt humanity would like to be reduced to like cattle essentially. So they pull up to Earth knowing two things. One, this planet could determine the future of their race. And two, Godzilla, humanity, Kong, and all the other titans will take this threat lying down. So how strong is the average Viltrumite? Well, I think it's fair enough to assume that the average Viltrumite should somewhat scale to Nolan, or as what you guys might know him as, Omni-Man. Omni-Man's a very strong member of his species, and he's held up in high regard. But I think it's fair to assume that the average Viltrumite could hurt him, like in a fight. By extension, establishing relativity, as even early series Mark can take prolonged beatings from high-tier Viltrumites. So we should be able to take any feats from Nolan, and especially any feats performed by Mark, and then kind of scale that to the average Viltrumite, or for Mark's case, just have something they just blatantly upscale. Mark, during the first season of Invincible, has a feat where he slams Alan the alien into the moon, causing huge debris to fly off, with calculations asserting that Mark can output force equivalent to at a low end 5 teratons and at a high end 4.9 pentatons, which is country to multi-continental. For some consistency in this range of power, Omni-Man has a feat where he was shown to dismantle the Flaxian homeworld, with the dust trails he was producing by simply flying being calculated to be at around multi-continental. The calculation should be on screen now, so you know I'm not making it up. But we actually have a nice baseline of power to scale to the average nameless Viltrumite, and it comes to us due to Grand Regent Thragg. Upon the destruction of the planet Viltrum, he states that the 37 remaining Viltrumites could, and I quote, rip the planet apart, which by itself is a small planetary feat. But by dividing the feat and assuming that each member is outputting a proportionate amount of energy due to the amount of people there, the average Viltrumite would be around moon level, which is an end of power consistent with Omni-Man's feat of chucking away a meteor the size of Texas. So we can assert that the average Viltrumite is around moon level. I also want to add on that the high tier Viltrumites such as Anissa, Conquest, and Thragg, etc., they would be around moon level as well. Seeing as how this is pretty much the first serious Invincible video on the channel, let me talk about my problem with scaling anyone to the destruction of planet Viltrum, as it's a feat that people use to scale the average Viltrumite to around planetary, but I have my contentions. Basically, during the Viltrumite War, 3 Viltrumites being Thaddeus, Nolan, and Mark have to fly through the planet Viltrum, destroying it in the process. A lot of Invincible scalers like to make it seem like they punched through the planet and it exploded, so they scale to that, but there's actually a lot of context that goes into this feat. As for starters, they use Space Rush's gun to drastically weaken the core of the planet. It's even stated verbatim that if they don't time their punch to hit right after the gun does, they would just die upon hitting the core of the planet. So even after hitting a weakened core, they have to run away because they would die in the explosion. Now granted, it's come to light that the planet Viltrum is a very durable planet, as Space Racer's gun is stated to be able to shoot through stars. Now yes, back in the day we had this statement, but it didn't really mean anything. Did it just shoot a hole through a star? Did it destroy the star? It was just kind of unknown, so it didn't really mean anything back in the day. But due to the animated series, we actually see what the statement meant, as the gun actually destroys stars upon hitting it. So the planet Viltrum, due to not being instantly destroyed by the gun, would mean that it's potentially more durable than a star. But once again, unfortunately, none of our characters scale to it, as they would die upon hitting it without the gun. And they would only all collectively scale to a weakened core that was hit with a star-busting attack prior. So unfortunately, this feat kind of just scales nowhere. But fear not, I don't think the Viltrum species caps at moon level, as I think one would get a little bit higher. And I'm talking about none other than Grand Regent Thragg. And in my opinion, he would be unquantifiably deep into moon level, to even small to even baseline planetary if you kind of wank him a little bit. And it just comes to how much blatantly stronger he is than everyone. Like, people break their fists upon hitting him. And then Thragg himself is casually able to stop high tier Viltrumite punches. And if he even tilts his head against a Viltrumite punch, the fist will break upon his face. So Thragg would be bare minimum moon level, though I think it would be a little bit higher or much higher due to just these showcases. As for speed now, it's pretty easy. Basically, Omni-Man was able to fly to a planet a couple galaxies away in at most a month's time, while not even going at full speed, as well as taking multiple breaks. There's two values for the speed, and they both assert that he flies at MFTL plus speed. Invincible characters are confirmed to have combat and reaction speed on par with their flight speed, so yeah, they scale to that. So yeah, any of the given 37 Viltrumites are around multi-continental to likely moon level, with one high tier being Thragg himself, getting up to moon level as a baseline, to possibly maybe small planetary to planetary, if you want to stretch it in terms of power. All of these guys should casually have MFTL plus speed. Viltrumites also have very good stamina, being able to fight for days at a time and even being stated to have near inexhaustible stamina. So how do the defenders of Earth compare to this? As you know, Kong and Godzilla have a new peak in power that for the most part should suffice as a new base. I think it goes without saying that both of these variants of the characters are much stronger than some of their normal bases. So let's talk about their previous ends so that we'll be talking about their new stuff a little bit easier. Kong for the most part scales to a near full power base Godzilla and GVK, so I'll be talking about the big guys metas, and then I'll talk about how Kong scales exactly to that. And then, only then, can we talk about some GXK stuff. Alright, so first off, to get a nice baseline for Godzilla's stats, he was able to beat Ghidorah in base. It's stated multiple times that he beat him in the ancient past, and in the modern day, Godzilla had the AP to rip apart Ghidorah's heads. It's also stated that Ghidorah had to store up energy in order to kind of prepare for Godzilla, implying that at this point in time, he wouldn't be able to beat him, so yeah, there's that. Ghidorah is a creature that can generate and create massive countryside storms, with the kinetic energy of these feats getting up to multi-continental, I think around 15-ish pentatons specifically, but this is a very casual feat for, you know, Ghidorah's attack potency. He kind of does it very passively, so it's not nearly the end of power for the Monsterverse. To talk about some better ends now, we're gonna have to talk about Godzilla's Atomic Breath, which is able to drill into the hollow earth. Upon face value, you wouldn't think this feat is too impressive because, you know, if you calculate it based on what's shown on screen, it gets to around island level or like island level plus. But once you take into account the fact that Godzilla's Atomic Breath likely destroys matter on a subatomic level, the yield of this beam during this particular feat gets a lot more impressive, with it getting pretty deep into the exotons at the very least, and it getting very deep into the zenitons at most. So more specifically, moon to planetary. But there's also another mid-end interpretation that says that it's around small planetary, taking into account the beam's subatomic destruction. So yeah, Godzilla pretty blatantly scales to his atomic breath in base, as he's able to endure a charged up axe shot that had multiple prolonged shots of the beam powered onto it. And according to the author of the novels, as well as behind the scenes statements, it didn't really do any substantial damage. Due to Newton's third law, this should scale to his attack potency, and you can easily get Godzilla to around moon to small to even baseline planetary. Keep in mind this is a state that's not even his base. Now moving on to base Kong, and he doesn't really scale to it in any real substantial way without the axe. And luckily for y'all, this is where we get to talk about Glove Kong, where in the movie, the 8th wonder of the world gets a glove that boosts his attack potency as well as durability. I can prove his durability is heightened as well because in GVK he died to a near base Godzilla stomping on him, and in GXK he was able to survive the same attack from an evolved Godzilla doing the same thing, and he was pretty fine afterwards. But most impressively, he was able to daze and overwhelm an evolved Godzilla for a very extended period of time. This is impressive as evolved Godzilla at the very least is supercharged level, as after defeating Tiamat he becomes supercharged pretty much, and then he evolves and explicitly gets more durable, with the novelization explaining that both his skin became denser and such. So Kong being able to daze and overwhelm a Godzilla that's more durable and dense than the one that took the axe to the face would be enough to get Glove Kong to the same moon to planetary ends of power. I want to point out that the moon, the planetary stuff, is a kind of a low end for these guys because, I mean, both current Godzilla and Kong should likely be above base supercharged Godzilla level due to the previous scaling chain. Like, for example, at the very least, they would scale relative to the feat right here. As for speed now, they would both be around relativistic plus to FTL plus, but I mean, it comes from mostly Ghidorah, who could dodge the atomic breath, which is made up of Cherenko radiation, which moves at 75% the speed of light. I will go deeper into it, but there's nothing really that's substantial or like even relevant because the Viltrumites can, you know, fly at MFTL plus speeds. So yeah, just they're fast, but they're like not that fast. So yeah, looking at base stats, the monsters seem to be much stronger, whereas they get to like small planetary and moon and planetary much easier than the Viltrumites do. You know, most of them are around moon level, but Thragg can kind of maybe be ifed. Like, maybe he's planetary. Like, maybe. While both Godzilla and Kong get to that just pretty easily. But the Viltrumites would just be much faster. So what would happen if these guys got into a fight? At first glance, it seems like the Viltrumites have a nasty speed advantage, but this isn't really the case because it turns out all those MFTL plus calcs only scale the Viltrumites and invincible characters while flying in space, because it's confirmed that characters are invincible have to slow down when they're near planets so they don't destroy them or like cause massive damage to them. This is shown in the show with Omni-Man, and it's pretty much how he's able to decimate the planet Faction. So for Thragg and the other Viltrumites who want to make Earth a kind of like new base of operations, it's safe to say they're not going to be fighting Godzilla and Kong at like a billion times FTL plus speeds. And I mean, even if they could, they really couldn't do anything with that speed because they're just so much weaker than Godzilla and even current Kong. So much weaker that you could just unironically appeal to the splat factor, which is a thing in Invincible where if you punch someone drastically stronger than yourself, the only person who will get damaged is you. Some people like to say this is inconsistent, and to be honest, I don't even know why. But I'm not going to appeal to that for this video because it doesn't change the fact that these guys couldn't even ever hope to hurt Godzilla or Kong. But let's say that the Viltrumites ignore the safety of the planet and just want Godzilla dead, so they try to increase their speed. This is also an issue because it's stated that multiple times that the atmosphere itself really nerfs their speed. So even if they wanted to, they still wouldn't really scale to like galaxy crossing Omni-Man, you know? They can't move at that speed on Earth because of the atmosphere. Like even high tier characters outside of any Viltrumite, such as Alan the Alien, are hindered by the atmosphere when they fly on the planet Earth. And it's actually a pretty drastic nerf because characters who are canonically 100 times slower than any Viltrumite, such as the Immortal, can tag Omni-Man when they're boxing on the Earth. And seeing how this is where this fight is going to take place, it's kind of a GG from that point. I'm not going to say anything too crazy, but I mean, there are statements that say that Viltrumites, when they fly at those interstellar speeds, they're just warping space-time, so they don't even really scale to any of it. It's kind of likened to like a Star Wars like hyperspace jump type stuff, you know? It's not really like raw travel speed, but I'm not going to appeal to that either. I'm going to give them more the benefit of the doubt. Because while it's stated that invincible characters move at Mach speeds unironically while in an atmosphere, I'm going to say they move at light speed or FTL+. So at the very least, the Viltrumites' one notable advantage, being speed, is kind of rendered null and void. So from there, they could either submit or die. From there, I've heard some people say they could just try to throw Godzilla into space, but due to the lack of any substantial speed gap, I mean, they wouldn't really be able to like speed blitz him and ragdoll him and like toss him up in that way. Like, I'm using evolved Godzilla for this matchup. A Godzilla much stronger and having much more energy than supercharged, who could just create nuclear pulses. So, I mean, Godzilla does have ways to deal with smaller enemies who are trying to like overwhelm him. Once again, the only real factor in this fight is Thragg himself, as all the other high tier Viltrumites are just so weak that they wouldn't even do anything except for die. And due to the speed gap being closed, it's safe to say that Godzilla and Kong would just pluck these guys out of the air, especially if you think they're only moving at Mach speeds while on planets, like most of the guidebooks like to assert, though I don't know about all that. So from there, I think that Thragg would see the Viltrumite people dying and just pack it up, unironically, just head home. As in character, at the point in time in which I'm using Thragg, he cares about Viltrumite lives, and he's even went as far as to spare Mark and Nolan after literally blowing up their home planet due to the sole fact that they were Viltrumites. So I think, like the comic, the Viltrumites could try to live amongst humanity and rebuild their race like that. But in a base-to-base battle situation, these guys are getting swatted out and nagged and eaten and squished and squashed and thrown and ripped apart. It would just be a slaughter. As it would seem that when it comes to protecting the Earth, it's in more than capable hands. Our winners are Godzilla and Kong. If you guys made it to the end of this video, I'd like to thank you. As you guys know, I've been doing this for a minute, and I want to talk about this because I've gotten 20,000 subscribers. It's so surreal to think that I've been doing this for less than a year, and I've already made it so far, and that's because of you guys. So thank you. And if you're new here, hey, you want to be like let's get the 50K. But anyways, I don't want to keep you here too long, so I'll be back next week. But until then, like always, stay Big G fans.